Hello and welcome to the latest episode of a Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. I am your host, Craig Fowler, and if you listened to the end of last Monday's show, you will know that we are taking a bit of a departure from our usual Monday podcast because I hopefully will be in Tenerife when this podcast is released. But either way, I think I'll be taking a week off from work, so it could be anything that was done after the weekend's games because I wasn't going to take my MacBook with me on holiday and edit a podcast, which would take... This in the video would take me, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours, but that's not what anybody wants to be doing on holiday. So we've recorded something ahead of time. So also, please forgive us as well if we say something about a player in this list and it turns out that he's had an absolute shocker at the weekend and he's broken his leg or whatever, or he's punched the referee and we seem to be ignoring it. We're recording this on New Year's Eve, the week before. So, but anyway, without further ado, let me introduce my guest for the show, and that is Mr. Craig Anderson. Craig, how's it going?
It's going very well. It's that time of year where you don't know what day it is, but apart from that, it's all good.
Yes, and on this podcast, we will be looking at every club in the Scottish Premiership and picking their best player in our opinion, their single number one best player. We do this every year pretty much at the Terrace. I think we missed maybe 1 or 2 years, but it's something we've done for about 6 or 7 years where we do the best players in each team and then we'll do a Patreon with the worst players in each team. Because if we're going to slag people off, then at least the players have to pay money to hear it.
That's it. You're signing up. Well, this sounds like fun. I'll sign up for that, and then it's the first thing they hear.
Surely not going to be me. I wonder which one of my teammates it is. Oh no. Right, but anyway, we'll just do alphabetical order as always.
Yep, it works for me.
Yeah, why not? Right, Aberdeen. So who is the best player you have for Aberdeen?
I'm going to say this despite him conceding 4 goals at Rugby Park and not necessarily looking great. I'm going to put that down to him just being back from injury. I'm going to go for the goalkeeper, Dimitar Mitov. I actually found this quite interesting because I looked through the squad and I was like, even though they started the season obviously extremely well, you're like looking there and you're like, well, these are like some good players, but there's not really a standout where you're like, oh, he's amazing. He's clearly too good for this level, and perhaps that explains a little bit why they've slumped so badly. But yeah, I thought Mitov has probably been the one who has saved them a lot of points as well through that run, and he's just clearly a very, very good goalkeeper of a standard that teams outside, I was going to say Rangers and Celtic, teams outside Celtic don't get very often.
Yeah, I went for Mitov as well, and well, he definitely deserves it because I think he's the best goalkeeper in the league. There is a little bit of by default to this because of kind of what you said. I was thinking through the players. It's like from like the defence recently, Malloy, Rubizic, they've not been good. Can't be any of them. Jack McKenzie is kind of consistently good. Nicky Devlin's consistently good. But you really having them as Aberdeen's best player? Don't think so. You go further forward. Shinnie's inconsistent now at this stage of his career. However, Nielsen was excellent at the start of the season, but he's kind of fallen back a bit recently. I think the complaints of Aberdeen fans is he's been playing too often. And then you get to the front players, and there's just, I think you can see it with the amount of rotation that they've done this season, and guys playing bigger parts like Shaden Morris, Vicente Bisayan, Pap Gay early in the campaign. Like there's nobody there that is guaranteed a place in the team, and if any of them were Aberdeen's undoubted best players, that they would be, whether it's McGrath's the one that's probably most guaranteed a place in the side. But even then, recently, there's a bit of kind of humming and hawing about the fact that he's starting to not look too clever again out in the wing. And it's whether the number 10 is his best position and whether Aberdeen can accommodate that into it. And also up front, it's definitely not any of them. So, yeah, Mitov, I think Mitov deserves it, but it's kind of deserving and a little bit by default as well.
Yeah, and I think like I had the same thought process because like their defence has been strong, but it had been strong, but it's not been like there's not like a standout player anywhere. And Duke is maybe the one because I thought like in that 4-0 game, I thought he was one that was like really, really good. But just with everything that's gone on with him, he's not been around for a big bunch of the season and he's very inconsistent. So it was hard to. He's the one that I thought, well, actually on pure talent, it's probably him, but we've not seen it mostly in the last 18 months, so it's kind of hard to go with him.
Right, let's move on to Celtic. So who have you got best for Celtic?
I found this a wee bit tricky, and I kind of focused in on the midfield because I think that is where they're strongest in it, and it was basically between the two guys. It's me, they're very obvious two best starting midfielders, and maybe it's just being bored of the other guy, but I went for Rio Hatate on the basis that he's clearly got a much higher ceiling than Callum McGregor. McGregor's had a fantastic season so far, but Hatate, I think you saw it, even though I was slating him for the first kind of 10 minutes of that game, you saw it against Leipzig in the Champions League, where unlike many Celtic players for a long time, you've got a midfielder who can actually like mix it properly. I say with a good Champions League team, Leipzig have not won a single point in the Champions League, but they are competing in the Bundesliga, so it's like clearly a good team, and he didn't like look out of place. So I kind of eventually defaulted on him ahead of a few others. It's quite a hard pick for Celtic because they've got obviously lots of very good players.
I mean, you're probably right with Hatate. I did kind of think of him initially, and maybe it's just because he's been there a while. I chose somebody different, but you do make a strong case, and I think you're correct overall in terms of just that higher ceiling that you're talking about, and he probably does have the highest ceiling of any Celtic player in the squad, I would say. However, I have gone for Nicholas Kuhn. Like I didn't go for McGregor. McGregor has been great this season, and it's funny that he's now discovered this ability to score crackers all the time from long range when he stopped playing for Scotland. I don't know if Scotland was he that tired? Is that it? Was he tired?
His leg wasn't going far enough.
Yeah, he couldn't generate the power. He just got constant, like whenever you go to the gym and your muscles ache afterwards, like muscle overload. McGregor just had constant muscle overload. Couldn't shoot from any further away than 18 yards. But I've gone for Kuhn because he's just been excellent this season. 14 goals and 25 appearances from the wing. He's just and I think he's the player now when you're playing Celtic. He's the kind of guy that stands out to you as okay, if we're going to win this game, who do we need to stop first and foremost? Now that is difficult because there's a lot of guys, because there's also Kyogo to worry about as well. But he's drifted back a little bit during Rodgers' tenure. He's been better this season than he was like last season overall, but it's still like his goal scoring numbers are still down a bit because he's still doing a role that's maybe not as suited to him as Andrew's team. But Kuhn's obviously come on leaps and bounds. Somebody who's not just in terms of his goals or assists, but also the kind of guy that just runs at defenders and makes opposing defences very nervous by his presence and his directness. And even games like the League Cup final, where I didn't think he was great overall, he was still making a massive impact on the match, and ultimately was a huge reason why they did end up drawing the normal period and the extra time period, and then also winning on penalties.
Yeah, I like Kuhn as well. Maybe it's a bit long, but I still have like flash in the pan vibes from him. Like somehow I don't know. I shouldn't, because I actually thought he looked quite nice when he came in right at the start, like in January, and then he obviously faded out a bit to the point where James Forrest was back in the team and stuff like that, and he was still playing some games, but he's been. I think it would be very fair to say he's been Celtic's best player this season. Mm-hmm. But I somehow just have this feeling that maybe it's not going to last. But there's no reason to think that. He's young. He's like developing. He's getting better. He's doing it at a high level. Probably it isn't, but yeah, that was maybe the only kind of black mark against his name for me. Okay, who do you have for Dundee? To be honest, I peeked behind the curtain because we're potentially doing the worst as well, and I actually found that also quite hard for Dundee in the same basis. Like they just seem to have a lot of players who are fine. Yeah, but I went this season for the player who I think is maybe just taking a wee leap forward this year is a young player that's obviously had a lot going for him for a while, and that's Lyle Cameron. I think he's always been good. He suffers for me at Dundee from the fact that they have like him and Finlay Robertson and Josh Mulligan, and I get them all mixed up all the time, so I'm particularly sure which one is which one. But Cameron is quite clearly the best of the three. Cameron's the one with the blonde hair. Yeah. The small one, but the small one with the blonde hair. But even just seeing the names, it's like you just get blindness to this bunch of names. But nonetheless, yeah, I think he's starting to add goal scoring to his game. He is full of energy. He gets involved a lot, and for his size, he is very physically. He mixes it nicely. Yeah. So I think he is one who probably isn't long for Dundee, but that's fine. They've struggled to have a successful youth system for a while, and you're maybe starting to see a few of these guys either being good enough to play for Dundee, and maybe the cases of the other couple we spoke about, which in itself is quite a valuable thing for a youth system, but also producing guys that you can settle on, which is ideal for them. So yeah, I think he's had a really good season, and it's probably building on being pretty good even before that.
So I've got Cameron as well. I would kind of disagree in terms of like a leap. Well, I agree and disagree. I know where you're coming from. I think that his form this season overall hasn't been as good as it was last year, and I think Dundee fans would agree with that. I think he's had more standout individual matches. Killie away, where you would have seen him being one of those, because I think he has struggled at points, and I think Tony Docherty has struggled at points to get the midfield blend exactly right after Luke McCowan left, because it was Mo Silla or Malachi Boateng sitting and doing the kind of athletic cleaning up work, and then it was Cameron kind of playing as a kind of number 8 and then McCowan almost as a number 10, and that fitted well. And then this season, I think it took Cameron a little bit to properly find his feet, but it's also meant that he's been pushed forward into this role of, okay, you're the man now. You are the best player on this team. It's up to you to win some games for us. And he's maybe not done it as often as you would have thought based on last season's performances, but it is a new role, and he has adapted to the new role, and he has had performances, like I said, where he has been Dundee's best player, and he has helped win them points. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether he is. It's weird. Does that mean he's taken a step forward? I mean, his form is maybe not as consistent as much, but he's been asked to play a tougher role. Yeah, you can maybe say that is a step forward.
He's standing out more, and maybe that's to people like me who don't watch as much football as you, because it's not my job, unlike yours. So even though I watch quite a lot, I sometimes can probably miss these things. But for me, when I see Dundee, which has not been that often this season, and maybe it has been often the games involving us, and we've already played them 3 times in the league somehow, he always kind of stands out, and I think he's 22 now. He's kind of moving towards that point where it's probably time to move on.
Well, that's a point as well of the fact that it could also be a case of, like, when you see him, like, I've seen him, yeah, I've watched quite a few Dundee games this season, and there is a point to it where I'm watching games and I don't think Cameron is necessarily that bad, but I see Dundee fans saying like, "Oh, Cameron stunk the place out," kind of thing, and it kind of reminds me of John McGinn at Hibs.
It's standards, it's expectations.
Aye, every game I'd watch John McGinn, like, he's clearly the best player in the park, and I talked to like Tony and Chris and that after a game like that, and McGinn was shite today, kind of thing. I'm like, really? Still thought he was easily your best player. There could be some of that with Cameron as well. It's just, yeah, like you say, living up to those prior expectations and expecting them to put in the kind of performances that he does when he is at his best every single week, and when he doesn't do that, he is maybe judged harsher than like a Finlay Robertson or a Josh Mulligan if they put in the exact same performance. Right, here's a tricky one, I would say. Dundee United.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. It's like they've got... They are clearly vastly outperforming the squad in terms of how they're doing in the league. I think that would be fair to say. I've seen them twice this season in the flesh, once in the flesh and once watching the full game against Killie, where I kind of view the games differently. I've seen them on a few televised matches, and they have so many weaknesses as a squad, and they have so many weaknesses individually, but they seem to be able to collectively get themselves kind of through it. And that's always hard when you therefore have a collective effort, and you're trying to work out like who's the best player in this collective. And it's probably true for a few different teams in the league as well. Come on to my own club, there's kind of the same idea. But I've basically just cheated and picked a guy that's the top scorer in the Premiership as a result. I don't necessarily think he's as good as being a Premiership top goal scorer, if that makes sense. But at the same time, he's into double figures. He has scored a lot of big goals for them as well. And I don't think it's been like loads of penalties. So he's coming up when Dundee United need him, and just as a result of that, like he's the one that stands out, as I say. Sorry, he's not in the double figures. He's got 9. I thought he had 10.
Well, it might have 10 by the time
double figures by the time
released.
this comes out. Yeah, they're playing Dundee as well, so possibly. But so I've gone for Dalby or Dalby. I don't know which way he would pronounce it on that basis.
So I'm just checking his. So it's not only it's 9 goals in 17 appearances overall, but I'm just checking because he didn't
start the season as like the starter.
He didn't score the first 5, so he's got 9 in his last 12. So see what you say about Kuhn. I kind of do think that with Dalby. I agree
as well.
I originally wrote down Dalby because I thought this is a flash in the pan stuff. He is. I've watched him quite closely. I watched him closely in the game when they played Rangers at Ibrox in which he scored, and there's just a lot about his game to not like. But he's very effective in this United team. But there will come a time where opponents do figure him out a bit more, see him a bit more, play against him a bit more. He's not going to, for the rest of his United career, he is only on loan, to be fair. But if, say he signs for United next season, in fact, I even think in the second half of the campaign, I don't think he's going to finish as Premiership goal scorer overall. I think he'll be caught and overtaken by Kyogo and possibly a couple of others. And he'll probably end up finishing on 15 or something like that. And also, if he signs for United next season, I just don't foresee him being a player that bangs in 20 goals every single season while he's in the Scottish Premiership. There's just a bit too much of limitations there, even though he does have things going in his nature. The fact that he does seem to have, at this point in time, a real kind of eye for goal, but that's not evidence across the rest of his career. It could just be a purple patch. He's quick and he's tall, but he is limited as a footballer, and that will eventually, I think it typically does, come back to bite with Scottish forwards.
I think you look through his career record, and this stands out. Like he's not. He was playing for Wrexham through the National League, and he scored more goals in the Premiership this season already than he did in a full season there, and stuff like that. And it's I know that there are imbalances, and sometimes players who are rubbish in England are good here and vice versa, but there's absolutely nothing from his career that would suggest that this guy's suddenly become a goal machine. Because you think of guys, there have been guys who at that kind of age have come up from England and suddenly been quite good in Scotland. I'm thinking of someone like Michael Higdon, but yeah. I think he was always a decent goal scoring record in England before he came to Scotland. Yeah, well, he was at Crewe and he did score some goals, but maybe he's that kind of player, and maybe he just finds a niche in Scotland. The style of the play, the style of the game suits him. But I think more likely it is this guy's had a wee run of goals and then he's fine after that. But I looked at that Dundee United squad and I was struggling to find out who else to pick, because I'm you're fine.
Yeah,
maybe you'll pick someone. And
I have, but yeah, no, you're spot on. I was thinking Kevin Holt's probably the player in the most form at this point. I mean, again, kind of talking about perhaps flash in the pan type stuff is Kevin Holt. And we're going to look back on this a year's time ago. Yeah, Kevin Holt was definitely the pick there. I mean, he didn't even start the season as the first choice in the left of the back three. Gallagher's the same, but again, Gallagher's the situation's really helping him out. Ryan Strain, we've not seen enough of him in a United shirt, and he didn't have a particularly great year at Millwall. It's St Mirren last year. St Mirren have turned it the Millwall of the top flight this season. Well, they're players, not really anything else. But and then you also kind of look at other parts of the team. I really thought about Vico Savelj.
He's been good.
He's been really good,
especially in midfield. I think they thought he was a right back when they signed him, and then. But yeah,
and
again,
I don't know if they thought he was a right back or he just filled in there after a strange injury before they got Stevenson in. And there's just Trapanovsky is good, but he's too inconsistent. Middleton's been good recently, but again, I would really call Middleton that player. You can go through this, you realise that United are very much a team greater than the sum of their parts, and that again goes to the fine work that Goodwin has done this season. But I went for Will Ferry. I think over the course of the season, he came in, he looked excellent right away. He's maybe tailed off ever so slightly in that he's not quite maintained that level of form, but I also don't think he's regressed to the point where he's been bad at all. And he's very industrious, getting up and down the wing, runs himself constantly, great stamina about him, but also a very good delivery, and somebody that contributes at both ends of the park.
Yeah, I like him. I think he's not he's not as good in it, and you wouldn't expect him to be. But there's like a little bit of the Owen Beck about him, like from last season, where he just like he's a left back nominally, but you do see him doing a lot of other things that left backs don't always do. So yeah, I do like him, but I wasn't sure. I felt like he was really, really good at the start of the season, and then he's still been okay recently, but he's maybe been overshadowed by some others.
Okay, let's move on to Hearts. Fuck me, this was tough.
Yeah, I think last season you had like it was hard for the opposite reason. You had like so many candidates, you had so many guys that were like, oh yeah, he's really, really good. And this year, like maybe as an outsider, I'll give my view, and then you can tell me I'm talking rubbish in terms of the player I've picked. But it's a player who I think has clearly been nowhere good as he was last season, where I thought he was probably in the top 2 of Hearts' best players. But I feel like when he's not in the team, you very much notice him, and that's Frankie Kent. And I feel he's gone backwards a lot this year, but I also think so is everyone else.
Yeah. He's not as good as last season, but he's probably had like the least drop off of just about anybody in the team, like who's like a regular or almost like a nailed on starter. I mean, Rose is a bit the same as well, but Rose is Kai Rose at this point. You know exactly what you're getting. But yeah, obviously Shankland major drop off, George Grant major drop off, Alan Forrest major drop off, Kenny Vargas. Benny Beningame, I think, is a real strong candidate to be Hearts' best player. But then I looked at just how many games he's played this season, and he's just doesn't play an awful lot because he's never fit enough. Fitness is a major thing lacking, and all things being equal in terms of fitness, Benny Beningame is, I think, Hearts' best player. But he gets too many niggling injuries, and he can't play 2 games in a week. Like, he can't do 2 90 minutes a week because he just doesn't have the fitness levels. And you have to mark him down for that. You just have to. Yeah, and I was thinking, so what else? I was actually thought of Shankland. I was thinking, right, he's been pretty rubbish this season, but he's still, in a lot of games, kind of the fulcrum of the attack. And you could just argue that this is a really poor patch he's going through, and once the team starts to operate a bit better around him in general, because even with Shankland playing as poorly, Hearts shouldn't be as bad as they are. It's not just Shankland, it's the players around them being crap as well, and the system not really suiting his talents. So there is something to call Shankland, but his form's just dipped far too much this season that it's hard to pick him. Kent's not a bad shout. I kind of ignored him because he's likely not going to play again this season, but he's not really got a history of being injury prone. He's just got an injury. He done his quad. That it just happens from time to time. So I'm swithering whether to keep that as the shout. And if it's not him, there's only 2 other kind of contenders, and that's Blair Spittle, who's good, but I mean, best player feels a bit of a stretch. And then somebody who probably would be most deserving of it if based on this season alone, and that's James Penrice.
But you've got the same thing, right? You've got like James Penrice, at all things being well, shouldn't be starting for Hearts at this point in his career. And it's like the fact that, because I did think about him, because he's been apart from giving away penalties in 3 games in a row, which was fun. He's clearly been, I think, again, he's been probably Hearts' best player this season, but I think that is more that everyone else has been like dragged behind him rather than him setting the standard for what you think a good Hearts player should be. So I thought Kent still has a little bit behind him from last year that kind of says he's actually a Hearts player.
You probably, you might be right. But I think the thing with Penrice is that his kind of form hasn't really, even though after the 3 successive games giving away penalties, his form hasn't still kind of lit up at kind of overall play. Like, he was still one of, not great, but one of the better players in the derby, and he was very good against Ross County and created the second goal, and also debatably should have won a penalty for what could have made it 3-0 to Hearts, and then possibly even Hearts wouldn't have thrown away that advantage. So this is tough. But I'm probably going to change my answer and agree with you. I'm probably going with Frankie Kent.
Good. I like it when we agree.
Right, let's Hibs. This is another so solid one, and I know, like, speaking of flash in the pans, but I was looking through their team, and like, so goalkeeper, no. Anybody for the defence, no. Midfield, Trantis, no. Like, they kind of rotate their number 10 Joe Newell plays just about every week. Joe Newell, I'm a huge fan of, and I should maybe give it to him, kind of similar to what you were saying with Kent, in that you have to take some of historically what's happened into account and what their form is over a sustained period of time and who they are as players. But I don't think Joe Newell's been that great this season. I don't know if the kind of captain's armband and a poor team is kind of weighing on him a little bit. And then you get further forward. Johan, on his day, undoubtedly his best player. The only problem is that day only comes around. I mean, this season it's probably coming around on average once every 10 games. Martin Boyle, again, make a similar case to the one in Johan, but again, how often is he at his best? He's playing very well at the moment, but how long is that going to last? It certainly wasn't the case earlier in the season. But there's just been one Hibs player who, over the last 2 months, since he's had a run in the team, has been consistently their best player, and or at least one of their best players, like the top 3 in every single game, and that's Nicky Cadden. So he's my pick.
Yeah, I picked him as well. it's like how could you pick any other player? You saw him again. His delivery is so good, and I think, to be fair to Cadden, like, he's a player who's always been good. To me, he's always been good wherever he's been. And it's like, okay, he started off at a lower level, but you sometimes get these guys who are like, you've got to the Premiership at like, what, 26 or whatever, 28, whatever age he is, and you're like, how have you just made it to the Premiership? But realistically, when he left Morton and he went down south, he probably could have got a Premiership contract at that point, because I think he was good for Morton, he was good for Livy, or at least he may have played in the Premiership a wee bit for Livy, but he was definitely like a contributory player all the way through. It wasn't like, he maybe wasn't really ever a starter, but he was always like someone who they brought on. And so it's like, he's had a good career, and it's maybe just the point where he kind of, you wouldn't have said a Hibs move would have been the right move for him. You wouldn't have said that was the level of club that you would expect him to go in at after coming up back up from down south. But obviously the fact his brother was there probably helped that substantially. But he has essentially an attribute that you cannot buy almost in the Premiership, which is the ability to cross from all angles. And I think players who are capable of doing that do well in this league, because you always, defenses are shit at dealing with crosses, and you have lots of guys who attack them, and you create chaos. So he is one that is now probably an automatic pick for Hibs, and he's automatic. And once he's that kind of automatically lifts him to being one of the best players in the squad, because there's probably only about 3 other players that you're like, you have to play every week.
His cross is brilliant, as you mentioned.
It's weird. He's got like the double. He's got all of his brothers' crossing ability. It's like they've been practicing in the garden, and then, or even in the womb. Maybe it was like the crossing ability was just like completely sent over to the left side.
I think it's funny that one of them's left footed, the other one's right footed, and they're twins. But yeah, his cross is brilliant.
The Boers were like that as well.
Oh yeah. So his cross is like that. He also has a great ability to go past players as well. He's not somebody that can beat somebody for kind of, I wouldn't say kind of necessarily skill, but he's good at kind of doing a wee bit of kind of hesitation, drop the shoulder, and then accelerating and getting that yard to wriggle past. And as Tony mentioned in last week's show as well, he's kind of perfect for that wing back spot, because he just works so hard constantly as well. And all those things married together, what else could you want in Scottish football? Also, he scores great goals. He's going to win Player of the Year. What's going on here?
He win Hibs Player of the Year at this rate, at the very least. Right,
let's go to your team, Kelly. So I wondered if this was quite easy, because I did eventually kind of settle on somebody. So let me go first of all, and I'm intrigued to see if you got the same player. So I think last season you would have maybe said Danny Armstrong, because the team kind of revolved around his crossing ability and cutting in from the right and swinging it in the penalty area, and then the big guys up front creating havoc for the opposing team. Armstrong has fallen off a bit this season. The defence, there's a few players you can say there. Finley's out for a long time, but like similar with Kent, are we going to mark him down for that? Doesn't seem entirely fair. He's not an injury-prone player. He was excellent earlier in the season. Lewis Mayo, great last season, still good this year. Maybe not quite lived up to form, but he's also had the players beside him changing just about every single week due to suspension.
And a lot of injuries. The amount of times that I was saying that the Hibs game when Joe Wright went off injured in the first half, the amount of times Kelly have had to like the defence that started the game hasn't been able to finish the game has been ridiculous. And yes, a lot of it's been defenders just getting sent off constantly, but there has been a lot of injury. So yeah, you're right. Like it's not helped. He's been the one that's kind of been there every game, but
and then there's a lot of players like Dees, Wright, Lyons, Vassell, Watkins. Watkins may be a little bit harsher, but I suppose at this point in his career, but it's just like they're all kind of very similar players in terms of it's industry. It's industry and consistency. Like when you talk about the defenders, that makes them kind of stand out and be good players. But the player that's got a bit of quality and does have everything else is Matty Kennedy.
That's who I picked.
There we go.
Yes. I think it was quite a hard one. It was kind of like when we're talking, there's a few teams like this. There's not like he's not like a standout player in the way that you're like, wow, this guy is too good for Kelly. It's more like there's a lot of workmanlike players and lots of players who do what you expect them to do, and Kennedy's very different to that. And you've seen definitely he's not a particularly injury prone player, but he's missed a few games of late, and that has definitely had an impact on the team. And Fraser Murray's come in and actually managed to kind of replicate a little bit of it, which has been very helpful, but he's still not Kennedy. And I think with Kennedy in a couple of those games that were tight, the drawn games or the narrow defeats, that he might have been able to kind of be the one that got something from those games. I did think about Lewis Mayo, I think, but on the basis the defence has just not been as good this season, I don't think he's a fair pick. David Watson is getting better as a player, but I think I spoke about him with Tony. He's still like, and I do think it's deliberate, to be honest, from McInnes, that he's been kept on his toes. He's been like having to shift around different roles. He's being given a lot of different things to do, and he's also not had as good a season. But you can see how good a player he is. But he's not the one to pick at the moment. So yeah, I think it kind of had to be Kennedy. I didn't really see who else to pick, because Armstrong is the best player in terms of ability. I would say, was that even true? Because Matty Kennedy has so much ability. Yeah. He's just it's been end product in the sense of numbers that had been the problem. His goal, I'm sure that was the case. His winner against Dundee in the 3-2 game, like back in September, October, whenever that was his first goal for Kelly. I think that's true. If it wasn't, it was definitely one of his first, and that's like, given he had this spell before. Okay, it was only a handful of games, was quite surprising. But he has, he has stood out this season, particularly as being like a very, very good player.
Okay, Motherwell, this has got to be the easiest one in the entire list, I would say. Yeah, I think this has got to be the easiest team to pick in the entire list. It's Lenny Miller.
Yes, yeah. He's you're talking about teams and having players that don't stand out above the rest, and they do.
Yeah,
it's like when you watch them and you're like, all right, you're just not on the same level as your teammates. You should not be playing for Motherwell.
So earlier in the season, I complained about it. Motherwell fans certainly complained about it, that they were using Lennon Miller in the kind of 3-4-3 as one of the number 10s, and it didn't necessarily suit them, but I could see why they were doing it. You can always see why teams kind of do that, pick their most talented player and shove them kind of further forward, because if they're the most talented, then you get them closer to the opponent's goal, because other players don't have the abilities to do as much. Motherwell have had some players come on since then. Maswarize, Stamatolopoulos, they've kind of improved and allowed them to play like a two up front, and Miller's kind of sat back a bit more. But he did start to, I wasn't a fan of that, and he did start to look a bit more comfortable in the role, and he was scoring more, and he was kind of playing, he was being a bit more creative than he was last year. His numbers were kind of raised. He did start to look, he wasn't at his best, but he did start to look comfortable. The reason why you do want him further back is because it's not only for his vision and creativity at that kind of deep line playmaker type of role, it's also the fact that at 18 years old, and me and you had talked about this, he's a very good defender. He's a very good defensive player for somebody that's 18 years old and has all the talent that he does. He will be held back from being, like, if he had pace, you would literally say he could be one of the best players in the world. He'll be held back from that becoming a fact, because he's just not quick at all. And that will also probably hamper where he can go and teams that he can fit into. I would love to see him go to Serie A rather than go down to England, for instance. Like that would suit him down to the ground. But he has just about everything else for a central midfielder. Like like I said, the vision, the passing ability, the crossing ability. He can also shoot. And as I just mentioned, defensively, his positioning's good. He gets stuck in. Other than pace, there is just no real hole to his game, and he's 18 years old.
Yeah, it's. I do think it. I think he's also got composure well beyond his years in terms of like, and that's off the field as well. I think like the fact that he's been involved in football, obviously his whole life. His dad being not just a professional, good professional Scotland player. Like, okay, not a brilliant Scotland player, but his dad had a very good career. Has meant that he's been very well supported. He's been very well looked after, and that has helped him. And yeah, to me, it's very clear that he has no business being at Motherwell. And I don't know if January will be the time where the rest of the world realises that, or if they're going to manage to squeeze another 6 months out of him. But
I wonder if he was sold by the time this podcast comes out.
Yeah, it's not impossible. But yeah,
I'm going to go with Maswinese. If Miller's been sold, Maswinese looks pretty good.
Yeah. Ewan Wilson, what a player! But no, they've got a real mix, Motherwell. But yeah, Maswinese's like, I think you spoke about sort of players who impact the game in moments, but maybe don't appear all the time. But he's one of those. But they do have quite a few. Like their defence has been surprisingly all right through most of the games, given the players that are in it, I would say. So they've got like a lot of things going on that you're like you're doing well. I think Stamatilopoulos has shown signs that he could actually be good, which has completely surprised me as well. Because I just thought you're not. Nothing about that signing, the fact he had a really long name, even you're just a novelty player. You're just going to turn up, like you're going to be remembered because you've got like the longest name in history, but you're not going to do anything. But we've seen him do well. I think they've had a good season up to now in terms of what's there. But the question is, we spoke about Miller. He clearly is the best player. If he's not there, well, that'll collapse a wee bit. But we'll wait and see on that.
Rangers. What did you hear for them?
I found it a wee bit hard to pick, but I ended up going for John Souttar. I don't think John Souttar should be Rangers' best player, but I was looking through that squad and I was like, either you've got absolute Drake or you've got players like Czerny who have been good, but you're like...
I'll pick Czerny.
But you're like, you should be good. Like, do you know what? It's almost like he's not doing anything that you wouldn't expect any winger that Rangers signed. Like, see if they had signed, we mentioned Danny Armstrong, see if they signed Blair Spittle, do you think he would actually have done loads less than Václav Černy's done? And I'm not sure. Maybe in Europe, that's the difference. He has done a couple of things. But you know what I mean? It's like he's contributed numbers and he has been good.
I mean, I like Blair Spittle, but I'd rather have Václav
Černy. But you see where I'm coming from? It's not like he's dragging them through things by the scruff of the neck. I really quite like the look of Igamani, but he's new to it. He's not kind of the one there yet. The midfield's awful.
Diamandi's gone backwards this season. Raskan's been good, but
he's been fine. But yeah,
he's injury prone as well.
I mean, talking of injury prone though, that's your big problem with Souttar. But finally, he has pinned down being good for Rangers, which has taken him long enough, and I think he's won over the support. He got himself back into being a regular starter for Scotland, played well for Scotland when he was. So all of that together, it made him a wee bit of a default pick. Again, Butland, who would have been your obvious choice maybe this time last year, has not had a good year at all. I think that's from January, to be honest. I think he's after a really good start at Rangers. So I don't want to pick John Souttar, but I don't really see. Yeah, Czerny's maybe the only other name I think that you could put forward.
So yeah, I went for Czerny. I've done a full, as I mentioned before, I've done a full 180 on him after leaving him out my combined Aberdeen and Rangers team that we'd done a few weeks ago, before Aberdeen started losing every single match.
Still 11 Rangers players at this point.
Yeah.
And that's Rangers at the...
Meet off in goals and then 10 Rangers players. No, but But in that one, I was thinking, like, because I'd seen Tierney at the start and I really didn't like the look of him. I thought he looked a bit of a shite bag, to be honest. And he just looked like somebody that, as you say, wouldn't kind of take things by the scruff of the neck. I think he actually has done that a bit more recently now, to be fair. I only saw the highlights of St Mirren and the Motherwell games, and Rangers didn't play well in either of them, so I can't imagine that Tierney necessarily played well. So this is maybe before then, but he did have a sustained period of about 6 weeks to a couple of months, and there's a lot of games in that time that Rangers were playing where I thought he was the only Rangers player, only Rangers attacker, certainly, and in fact, only Rangers player, because Suter got injured, that you could rely on to turn up and play well. Because everybody else just seemed to have games where they look great and then look shit the next week, like right throughout that squad. Whereas I think he has shown the consistency to do that higher up the park and to constantly kind of create and score when you're in a team that's not functioning very well, I think also speaks to his ability. So I've went for Cherry for that. I like your Suter shout, but I'm just going to not pick John Suter because of the fact that he's injury prone, and that has to go against him.
Yeah, I think it's fair enough. I didn't want to pick Suter, but I couldn't quite decide what to do.
Ross County.
Like, I was looking through, because I was even like, they've got so many players, and like it feels like they do. And I was looking through like who's even been playing regularly, and there's only a handful of guys that have like played like 3/4 of their games. And not that has to be the only way to pick a player, but I was just trying to like do anything to decide between them. Like their goalkeepers changed a wee bit with injury. Their defence has been a wee bit upheaval there. Akil Wright's the only one that's played every week. I don't think it's him. Like, so had we been picking this 2 months ago, I think it would have been a quite clear choice of picking Ronan Hale for this, but he's also since then scored like 1 goal in 12 games or something. So I have settled on maybe what's a wee bit more recency bias, but I think this guy is actually a really, really good player, and it's Josh Nisbet.
All right, okay.
I thought it was a wee bit of a surprise that they got him in the first place, because, and I mean, again, as players coming from Australia, they just appear at random like whack-a-mole. You don't know where they're going to pop up next, but he's an Australian international. It's not like a guy, and I know that's maybe a low bar to clear sometimes, but it's not a guy that, you talk about guys like Stamatolopoulos, who's, again, we said has been good, or all these other Australian players that have signed for Scottish clubs that are just like decent A-League players chancing their arm. He had a pretty good career. He won, I think he was A-League Player of the Year. And now again, we know from Mark Birighitti that A-League awards do not necessarily correspond to being particularly good. But
Natty Atkinson were in the Player of the Match in the grand final while playing right mid. Also speaks to that.
Anybody can win a man of the match once. I think winning a player of the season is bigger than that. But nonetheless, his team, I think, won the league. Yeah, the Mariners won the league. I don't remember if they did win the grand final as well. He was Player of the Year in Australia, and so you think like this guy, when it said he was coming to Scotland, I was thinking maybe Aberdeen, maybe Hearts, maybe Hibs. So I'm signing for Ross County. It was a bit of a coup, and then at the start of the season, I don't think we really saw that, but of late he has been he's been flying, I think. And for a guy, again, we talk about small players, for a guy who's also very small, he gets involved quite well. And again, it's a low bar to clear to be Ross County's best player this season, but I think it is him.
So my pick probably won't surprise people, even though I think there's a lot of County fans who don't actually like him. But I'm going to disagree, and I think you're wrong about this guy. Noah Chilvers, he's my pick. I think for a lot of the season, you're getting a bit more at Nisbet recently in terms of attacking threat. But before then, it was literally like Ronan Hale. And obviously their plan B of get Jordan White on and chuck balls up to him. Other than that, what threat was there at all from the county team? They really struggled for any sort of creativity to replace Jan Danda. And it looked like for a period that they just hadn't done it at all. Because the first signing they thought might do that was Jack Greaves, who's like looked okay in some appearances, but overall he's not been the player that they hoped when they first signed him. Chilvers, I just like because he just tries stuff constantly. He's what you want in a creative midfielder. He's got no fear and he's got a short-term memory. He doesn't care the fact he's given the ball away 5 times in a row trying to play a through pass. He's going to attempt it on the 6th occasion, and that's what gets you goals. And he's not got great in terms of, he scored his first goal of the season against Dundee, and he doesn't have as many assist numbers as you would think. But there's games where I've seen where it's County have scored because he's taken like a shot that's like deflected off a defender and then fallen to the feet of like Hale, or he's tried a through pass that's only been partially cleared and somebody else picks it up and then has a shot and scores. And it's things like that don't show up in the stats. And I think what you sometimes need to remind football players and football fans of is like, we bemoan players who are playing it safe all the time and don't take chances, and I know this especially as a Hearts fan, but at the same time we absolutely murder them whenever they give the ball away. And it's like, well, you can't have it both ways, because you can't just demand a player that he plays a perfectly good through pass every time, or he has a shot that hits the top corner every time. You need players to try things that are a lot of the time not going to work out, because the risk is worth the reward. And Chilvers, to me, just epitomises that perfectly. Also, just like the way he stands out, he's got a Jason Cummins kind of look about him, slightly not stocky, but like for a footballer, kind of slightly stockier build. He's got curtains and he's got the very short shin pads with the socks coming up just slightly a bit above his ankles.
Yeah, no, that's as good a reason as any. I think if you were a scout, that you would be on the shin pad watch, and you're a team entirely made up of low shin pad wearers, regardless of ability. And who's to say that wouldn't work?
I want to see somebody try to make that team now.
I like Chilvers. I think dead ball and stuff is useful as well. He was one that I thought about. But again, you've seen Ross County a lot more than I have, so that's
St Johnstone.
Oh,
I thought this one was quite easy.
I went for Benjamin Kimpioka.
Yeah, same. I think he does he's not been amazing, but he just stands out more in terms of ability than I think anybody else in that team.
Yeah, he's a good striker. I think Sidibe obviously stood out massively in the wee run-in last season. Is always going to be quite a streaky player. He's like quite explosive and quite unpredictable, yeah. And we've seen more of the bad than the good this season, I would say. But Kimpioka is a guy who, we've got a lot of strikers like this in Scottish football, just constantly involved, just doing stuff, just making runs, running into people, appearing on the wing, appearing on the other wing. You know he's playing all the time, and to be honest, in this St Johnstone team so far, that's maybe been enough to stand out.
Yeah, no, I would say that. There's not really too much to add to the Kimpioka one. He's somebody that not only has talent about him in terms of his goal scoring, and like he's just kind of got a bit of skill in those long, rangy legs of his, but he's just also somebody that fights and works right to the end. He can sometimes get frustrated and do daft things. I think the game at Easter Road, even though the red card itself was a bit harsh, that was an example of that, where it was kind of coming regardless, because he was just getting a bit too frustrated. But he certainly kind of clearly cares for the cause. He's not as much of a selfish player, I would say, as Sidibe as well, who often kind of goes himself when he probably shouldn't. And yeah, just without him this season, I mean, St Johnstone are already bottom when we're recording this, but I mean, how much would they drift if he hadn't have kind of stepped it up a bit from his performances last campaign?
Yeah, good player. Probably not someone who will be in the Championship next season.
No, definitely not. I think St Johnstone are talking they might not even be here at the end of January. Maybe there's a we should pick a player if Casey's away.
I do love that. Like sometimes you wake up on New Year's morning, like check your phone, and there's been like 2 transfers already. Although it'll never beat the time that Ross County were playing the Highland Derby on New Year's Day and announced the team with Jordan Slew in it, and they hadn't even. It was the first time I'd ever even heard of him.
Okay, our final team, St Mirren. I think this was a bit tougher, I would say.
Yeah, they've got a lot of good players that have had pretty decent seasons, especially of late. I don't know if this will be something their fans will agree with, but it's a guy who I've rated as a player for a very long time, and he's finally kind of established himself properly at St Mirren, and after an injury at the start of the season, he's kind of come back into the team, and it's coincided with a lot of their good form, and that's Greg Kiltie.
Not a bad shout at all.
I think, it's weird, he's only 27. He's obviously feels like he's been around for like 20 years at this point, but so talented when he broke through, had so much adversity at that point with the injuries that he kept suffering, which really did for him as a player that should have been at a higher level, I would say. Saved Kelly from relegation one season, but then faded out under Clark, had to go down to the Championship for a wee while, and then that move to St Mirren at the start of it, it felt like he was drifting a bit, but probably over the last 2 years, I would say, he's cemented himself as kind of a very central figure, playing a wee bit deeper than I think you would have thought that he would have ended up playing as a player, but really creative, very brave footballer in the middle of the park, two-footed, does everything really well, and I think, is he an amazing player? No, but is he a very, very good Premiership midfielder? Like, yeah, he absolutely is, and I think pretty much any team would, apart from Celtic, would find a use for him.
So that's a very good pick. I Kelly could have slipped my mind. I
feel like he's a very easy player to forget about because he does his business and you don't hear him. You don't know anything about Greg Kiltie. You don't hear him, especially with St Mirren. That's been helpful off the field stuff or anything at all. He's just there.
Yeah, because he does have like every kind of Kelly player. He works hard for the team, tracks back well, gets helps. Him being in the team really kind of helps the balance in the centre of the park. Maybe just a lack, but he does have quality. He does have quality in terms of creating and scoring. Maybe just a lack of doing both overall for me to pick him. I thought about Olasanya. He's really, the story with him is you love these stories whenever they happen. Guys who look like dreadful and then they go away, work on their game, and all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden with him, but kind of gradually just make themselves better. And better and better and better. And at the start of the season, they certainly looked like he was St Mirren's best player. And had we done this in September, probably would have been the obvious pick. Regressed a little bit, maybe slightly recently. And also, having watched the recent match against Dundee United, it was one of those games where I was like, I'm not sure about your suitability to play on any kind of other team other than one that's going to give you plenty of room to run in behind and run into the corners and stuff, which he is great at doing, and he is such a weapon at doing that, and he has added goals to his games that wasn't really there before. But overall, I've gone for somebody who's probably been St Mirren's most consistent player over the last 18 months. And even though I do believe that he is probably their best player due to the system in which he plays, because he played in this position for another team in the Scottish top flight and didn't look any good, and that's Alex Gogic, who marshals the St Mirren back three and is a perfect fit for what Stephen Robinson wants his defenders to do, which is for those guys to take turns kind of stepping up and out with the ball and to leave the back line and to go and challenge opponents. And that's what they get from being in the three with the extra man insurance, and Gogic is better than everybody. But it's just like, you read what St Mirren fans say after their games, and it's pretty much every week when they play well, at least somebody's saying Gogic was outstanding again. So it's just, in terms of quality there's reasons why that we maybe mark him down. But in terms of quality performance over the last 18 months, I can't give it to anybody else other than Gogic.
I really like him as well, and I think we talked obviously when he was at Hibs, it was like, and it was obviously a good Hibs team, and it probably didn't help him to that extent because he stood out as being, and he was playing centre mid in a good Hibs team and stood out as just not being good enough on the ball. But Hibs have never really found a player like that since. But also Hibs have never really had reliable centre half since as well. And you do wonder, could he have just been a very good Hibs centre half instead of having to go to St Mirren? But I do like foreign players that come to Scotland and just get stuck into it and just very much resemble the style of Scottish players, if that makes sense. It's like he's obviously so well suited to come and play here. It's not, when you talk about Cypriot players, you don't really think, just from, I think, Southern European players, you think of they're not going to cope with the conditions in Scotland and stuff like that. But he's never had any issues with that. So yeah, a player I would have liked to have picked. I'll do something different. So.
Right, that does. So if you enjoyed that and you want to listen to more, we are going to be doing the worst players that we believe play on each of the Premiership clubs. And Craig, I forgot to mention to you this beforehand, but we typically do this and we don't just pick a guy who's played twice, looked absolutely terrible, and not been seen again. We pick guys who are in the squad and play, if not starting and at least coming off the bench most weeks. So it'll be guys you've heard of. So if you want to listen to that, head over to our Patreon. That is patreon.com/Terrace Podcast, where there, even though I have been on holiday, we've hit our quota of shows going up each and every week, and there is just hours and hours of bonus content there, which you can unlock all of it for as little as £5 a month, and you can unlock some of it for as little as £2 a month. And I don't think I wouldn't have put the disclaimer at the start on this one, but if you do sign up, best that you don't sign up through the Patreon app on Apple. If you have an Apple, then you do get charged more for signing up, because Apple just help themselves to an extra fee. If you have an Android, you're fine. Sign up through the Patreon app. If have got an Apple phone, sign up through the website and then download the app onto your phone and sign in, and then you shouldn't be charged. But Craig, that'll do us. Thank you very much for joining me.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you and I hope everyone disagrees with every single choice I've made, and yes, please tell me.
And thank you to everybody for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Goodbye.